Long Island Changemakers with Tommy D. Well, that's why I'm here, because I'm Tommy D. This show is all about people doing important work on the front line. Sometimes they're business professionals, sometimes they're nonprofit leaders, sometimes they're one and the same. All about people who are change makers here on Long Island. Well, that's what the name of the show is all about. And then you throw in the Tommy D, and that's why I get to be here. Today, my friend Ian Wilder is here, Executive Director of Long Island Housing Services. Thanks for being here. It's been so long since we've known each other. We've not actually ever really sat down and had a conversation like this, though.
Yeah, it's always good to see you, Tommy.
Thank you very much.
You're always good company.
I appreciate that. That's nice. I mean, the thing about being Tommy D is like you get to leave here in about a half hour, 40 minutes. I can't get rid of this guy. Every time I turn around, he's right there next to me. So
I know the feeling.
You know the feeling.
Yeah, it keeps following you around.
Everybody's like, my shadow, my shadow.
And you look in the mirror, he's staring at you.
Now I feel like you know me even better because I tend to stare at me a lot. So like if we were on a Zoom meeting together and there was like 9 of us, I'm really focused in on one member of that Zoom meeting.
If there are 9 of us, I might have turned my camera off.
Why?
I guess. Is
that a lot? Is that too much?
No, I guess if it's 9, no. But if it's like 30 people,
is that overwhelming?
It's a lot, and they also say it's not good for your mental health to be staring at yourself all the time.
Yeah, I look at me a lot, man. I'm a fan.
A lot of people are a fan of yours, Tom.
Well, I appreciate that. That's good too. You know, a lot of people are a fan of mine. That's nice to hear. But I want to tell you a funny story. And then this is not about me, but the story is about me. But I went to an event recently, and friends of mine were like so appreciative that I was there. And it's an organization I'm a member of and the whole thing. And they were like floored that I was there. And I was like, what are we talking about? We're friends. You asked me to be here. I'm a guest of Jovia. Like what? And they're like, no, so thank you so much. I'm like, I don't know what happened. Like people think I'm at this other like level now where like I'm like a celebrity. I'm like, this is not what we're dealing with. So this was not supposed to be about me. I don't know how it just turned that direction, but I'm just a regular guy, Ian. Yeah. Just a regular guy.
But I kind of know how you felt. I went out to support a friend who's within a group of people that people often mistreat. Oh. And I'm not a member of that
community, that group?
This person was so appreciative that I came because people just push them aside. And you know, so yeah, but it's nice. It's nice
to be grateful
to show up. It's also nice to show up for people.
I try to show up as best I can, you know, and I'm one of these people. There's not enough hours in the day, you know, and I think it's important to show up for the people at home too, like literally at our house, right? Because that becomes, you know, sometimes the world gets to see me, and I don't, you know, it's a happy balance, you know, figuring that out.
Yeah, well, you got to do it. I was thinking about today because, you know, my top 3 identities are father, husband, executive director.
Right, in that order.
In that order.
Yeah.
Especially because my daughter is little, so I mean, if she was a grown up, it might, you know, the top 2 might switch. But
you can maybe rejigger
I have responsibility to it.
Sure.
So yeah, it's got to be in that order because, like, if you're not taking care of your home, you can't take care of anybody else.
100%.
It's the oxygen mask thing.
100%. I love that, and that thing is like that's cliche, that oxygen mask. But you know why? Because it's real. Because it's true. That's why things happen. That's why the cliche things happen, because it's true. Because like. And I talk a lot about, we do another show here called #Ending the Stigma Together about mental health.
Yes.
And I say a lot, like, self-care is not selfish, because if you don't worry about Ian and I don't look out for Tommy D, I can't help anybody else out if I'm not taking care of me. Yeah, it's so important. And we got to remind each other of that. Yeah. I want to know about Ian, though. Because we've met through the Nonprofit Resource Hub is like the next iteration of what we used to do, Christine Deska and I, with the roundtables. And I feel like our relationship goes back to the nonprofit roundtables. Yeah.
So, you want me to tell you a little bit about my work? I want to know,
how did you get to the nonprofit sector, and then the work you're doing? Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit of Ian. My wife and I, for quite a long time, I was working a straight job. I was a local real estate attorney for over a dozen years, maybe 15 years. But outside of that, I was doing tons of social justice work. We had, not like this, not like Actor Studio, we had a public access on a little dinky camera with little tiny things. You know, we were doing events, we were doing actions, we were working with people and activists, and there became an opportunity for me to do a career change. and to move into, and I actually did an interesting career change. I went from being an attorney to being a housing counselor, but it was closer to a lot of the other work I was doing, and I did not, it's very funny, of those 3 titles, I didn't expect to have any of them.
Sure.
I
Wow.
was a very shy kid. I never expected to be married, have a kid, and I definitely didn't expect to end up, even when I switched to working on housing services, I did not expect to be executive director. The funny thing is, when I applied there, because I did all the social justice work, the current executive director was already a friend because she did social justice work.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, she's running a civil rights nonprofit.
Sure.
So I already knew her, and I was doing work more in foreclosure prevention there, because we also do housing counseling, besides the fair housing enforcement work we do. So, looking back, you can say, this whole thing was a great plan, and I developed all these skills, and they worked together, and that's just a load of baloney.
But it looks like, when you look back, though, it starts to make sense, even if that wasn't the plan going forward, right?
I mean, it works well. I mean, I was, for a while, very involved in partisan politics, so I know some of the elected officials. I understand how the systems work. I did a lot of public events. I had some experience doing PR, so all that stuff I folded into my job, and had the ability to shape how I do my position versus how other people do theirs, based on what I know my strengths are.
Well, you take your skill sets, right, and you utilize that to the best ability of what's in the work at hand, right?
Yeah, that's what you try and do.
I love that.
And you try not to go too deep, because I could spend all day like molding an email to go out to people. And
you don't have ChatGPT?
I do use ChatGPT for first drafts, but it's also the visual elements, like where do the pieces go? What are the visual elements? What other things should be in there? What makes it easy to read? I do use, actually, I've been playing with Claude lately. I do Poe.com, which does everybody.
I don't know all these things. So,
I use them, they're good for first drafts. They're really good for first drafts. Because first drafts are the hard thing. There's a writer, Annie Lamont, who has this book, Bird by Bird. And to use TV appropriate language, she says basically every first draft is terrible. So just do your first draft.
Just get it out. So
to me, AI helps me cheat. I don't have to do the pain
of the first draft.
Because you go straight to editing.
Yeah, I love that. Emails kill me, man. I mean, I'd rather call you. I'd rather just,
but I'm talking about like long form. I have to do a fundraising email. I have to do an email explaining why we're having problems with funding from the federal government at the moment. And I'll dump in the materials, I'll dump in source material, I'll tell it what I want. You're supposed to also tell it who it is.
Who the recipient of it?
Who the recipient is, and who the person drafting. You give the AI an identity.
Got it. So they're writing as the executive director, or they're writing as a development director.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying? Right? Because it's a different language, it's different.
And then I edit it out. And they do make terrible mistakes. I had one working on a bio for me, and it said I was born and raised on Long Island. I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts. I lived here when I was 3.
Right.
It's like, dude, you got this completely wrong.
I bet you there's an Ian Wilder from Long Island.
There is, but I gave it source material about me.
So it had the, but it still went and grabbed up.
But it said I was born here.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with it. But it does get you past the first draft. It gets you from initial draft into editing. And editing, at least for me, is so much easier.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, I could see that, because it's like, for I think a lot of people, it's like, now I'm going in and tweaking, cut and paste, versus coming up with like, I just got to start. Like, I wonder about like professional writers who write books, and they say writer's block and stuff.
And I'll tell you one thing. I mean, we do. I should talk a little bit about the work we do.
I'd like that. Yeah.
We do fair housing enforcement work. Most of the cases that you see in the papers where somebody broke a fair housing law in Long Island, that's us. The case that blew up huge because it was a former Nazi summer camp, and you couldn't buy a house there.
Here on Long Island?
Yeah, there was a former Nazi summer camp in Yaphank. It turned into a housing development, HOA, and you couldn't buy in there unless basically your grandparents were born in Germany. There was still some Nazi insignia around. Yeah,
really?
This is the last 10 years.
Wow.
And that was our case, and that blew up because the word Nazi was in it.
Yeah,
so the media loved that.
Yeah, they like that.
So, but we do, like, we go out and do the testing. We help people with complaints.
Tell me about testing. I think we got to break it down for people. But before we do that, one quick question: why or what brought you to social justice work historically before your role now?
My parents.
Yeah. Grew up in Springfield.
No, I grew up here.
Okay.
We moved here the week before I turned 3.
Oh, okay, got it.
So I consider myself a Long Island boy.
Yeah, got it.
Because I grew up here. I went through Copic schools. I went to
Got it. So you just weren't born here. So
yeah.
your parents brought you to this world of social justice. Now, I'm not questioning why would you do that. I mean, why do you do that? How did that happen?
Well, my dad was a teacher, and my mom had a social work degree. My mom worked in or ran more nonprofits than you can imagine.
Is that right?
She was president of the Copic Youth Council. She was president of the Tri-State League of Women Voters. Yeah. She was, I'm trying to think, she ended up being president of a temple at one point. Yeah. So they did stuff in the community.
So you saw that, you watched that, you were looking up at that.
Yeah, and it's just, there are things because I come from a Jewish background, there are things in Judaism that you can quote, one's tikkun olam, which means it's a broken world and it's our responsibility to try and heal it. The other one is there's a quote that it's your responsibility to do the work. You're not responsible to complete the work, but you're responsible to do the work. And my parents never said these things to me, but it kind of what was in our household. Sure. Like, this is what this is your dues for being alive. This is what you're supposed to do. I
love that. So I love both those things.
So, and I found them later on. It really helped me put into words. And I'm sure every faith tradition has some version of it. St. Francis of Assisi is quoted as saying, it's not clear whether he said it, preach often, speak when necessary. Meaning, your life and your action should be how you preach, not what you say, but what you do.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's how I came to the work, and it's kind of, the way I was raised.
I love that, but I think those Genesis stories for me are important because I'm going to sit here curious for 20 minutes. Go, why the heck do you do this? Why is it so important?
The story I love is my dad served in World War II. He was in the Atlantic Pacific. He should have been dead for a number of different reasons. He ended up in Japan after a Victory in Japan Day. He said, and my dad was shorter than me, and he said he was tall in Japan. He noticed where he was around. And he saw a starving child with a distended belly, and that's when he decided he had to be a teacher. That was like, boom. Now, he was furious at the Japanese for the atrocities their government did in the war, would never buy a Japanese car. But the fact that there was a child there starving.
Sure. That child's an innocent.
Yeah, exactly. And that rocked his world, and he dedicated his life to helping children.
Wow. That's a great story.
It's a great story.
But that's a great story, man. I love that. But I wouldn't know that story if we don't push a little bit on this stuff. Now you can tell me about the programs your organization does, because now we have more context.
Well, I was going to loop it around a little bit, because I was talking about, we do the day-to-day enforcement. We help people protect their rights. But we also work on the long term, because if we don't change the systems that continually discriminate and segregate people, it's not going to happen.
Come on, Ian Wilder. Nobody on Long Island discriminates. What are you talking about, sir? Yeah, Let's talk about that, because I don't think people don't realize that redlining and the history of that type of stuff.
I mean, even when there was just Suffolk County. Now, this is Suffolk County. This is not like a bleeding heart liberal organization. Suffolk County is part of getting HUD money, has to do this whole process every 5 years, and they did a study. And they did a survey, and they asked people, are you a victim of discrimination? And there were serious numbers for people who saying, yes, I've been discriminated against. I know the work we do never gets to the numbers of people who are being harmed. And the problem is that we haven't changed our education so that we understand what's been done to people. For instance, when I went through school, I really didn't learn the truth about the Reconstruction after the Civil War, and how that it was actually successful, but it was then attacked, and then the Klan was allowed to rise because there was a political deal to pull out the troops. There was one state where after the war, the majority of the elected officials, because the majority of the population was African American, the majority of the elected officials were African American.
Okay.
And they were successfully running and representing the state.
Yeah.
And then what happened was the protection was taken back, the discrimination was allowed to violently go forward, and that representation disappeared for decades and decades and decades because it wasn't allowed. So yeah, I mean, there's a wonderful book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, former New York Times reporter, New York Pulitzer Prize winner. And there's also a short Hulu series based on the book. And what she ends up in the book is, and there's reasons she gets to this metaphor, she says, look, we inherited this house. We didn't build the house, but we inherited it. But now the roof is leaking and the basement's cracked.
Right. It's not, maybe it's not your fault, but doesn't mean you're not supposed to do something.
But you got to fix it.
Right.
And not only that, you got to admit that these problems exist.
Yeah.
You can't pretend that, for instance, the zoning system we have was originally created to segregate. Literally.
That's here on Long Island. When you're
Everywhere,
speaking that
through the United States.
Through the country.
And that's why it was put through the country. It was purposely put through the country to segregate people. That's why it was developed originally. And that's the reason why we still can't have the type of housing we need, because it's meant to separate people.
It's still
the idea to have these large single-family houses everywhere don't allow people to get the affordable housing. Until we face up to those systems, we can't change them. We can't keep saying, oh, we're going to use the system and do it better. No.
The system is broken. The fundamental way it's set up doesn't work.
And that's the one thing I've learned from systems theory. Systems aren't actually broken. They do what they're designed to do.
It was set up that way. Okay, perfect. So it works exactly the way it was supposed to work.
It works the way it's supposed to.
Got it.
So we're never going to get the amount of housing. We're short like housing for like 100,000 people.
Yeah.
We're losing people all the time. We're going to lose the people who run our economy. Remember the essential workers? They're not going to be able to afford to live here. And this is not the middle of the country somewhere where people can live somewhere cheaper and drive in. With a low-paying job, you can't commute onto Long Island.
Right.
That's not a thing.
No.
And we're going to lose political power because, believe it or not, the red states are the ones who are recognizing property rights, so they're letting people build housing and affordable housing. Their populations are going up. Ours are going down. Congressional representation is based on what? Population. So we're going to lose political power and people. We're going to hollow out our economy. So, and all this traces back to, all this has an overlap with fair housing, which is why you'll hear me talk about affordable housing a lot of the time. Now, you want to know about testing. Testing is kind of like somewhere between secret shopper and police work. The most common version you saw on Newsday is you send two people out. One's in the protected class and one's a comparison. They both go out there, profiles where their economics are the same. They're both looking for the same kind of housing in the same area. And there's no trick questions. There's no trick to it. In New York State, we can record it. So the people.
Oh, in New York State, legally, you can record it?
Legally, one person can record, one person in the conversation. So people can't complain that we did something wrong, that we backed them into it. They're just going out looking for housing. And we see if they're treated differently. Yeah. Or often there's the thing called source of income, which you can't discriminate based on how somebody pays for rent. In those, they'll explicitly discriminate. Oh, we don't accept that kind of money.
Based on source of income, which you're saying
we don't accept that kind of money. We don't accept vouchers, which actually economically makes more sense because a voucher is a sure way of paying your rent
than somebody's
most
salary.
People's job. Yeah. Most of us are at-will employees. We could be fired the same day. Get the box clear at your desk. But a voucher, that's harder to take away.
Sure it is. So, okay, so let's play this one out really quick. So you have the protected class and the comparison, you said, right? Yes. So who's the, I'm going to use this word, my word, not your word, but who's the culprit? The realtor in this scenario?
It could be a real estate agent. It could be a landlord. Okay. It could be an insurance company. It could be a bank. So it could be an appraiser, which has come to everybody's attention, but it's been happening for a long time. So it could be anybody who's a housing provider. Okay. Anybody involved. We've had a lot of cases recently with landlords. We've had cases with banks. So it could be anybody who's involved in the market who's discriminating.
What got you? So there's this whole life cycle of that.
It could be a municipality.
Okay. I want to understand, so somebody in a protected class is looking for a new home. Let's say they're going to purchase a new home, right?
They're going to purchase, sure.
So they're dealing with a real estate professional, real estate agent, a realtor, broker, whatever. Is there like, are you saying protected people in a protected class are not even going to be shown the same house, not even take it to the same neighborhood?
Newsday did a great job. Yeah. 2019, they did a whole thing on this. They're one step up from us. They had cameras. And literally, there's something called steering, which is where you send somebody to different neighborhoods based on what they look like. There was one agent who said, I don't mean to the white tester, I don't mean to steer you, but. And They did maps of them. You can go. Newsday, it's outside their paywall because it's that important. And they have maps, and they show people who had this. And by the way, the person who had helped them set up is like a national expert. He's testified in dozens of states about testing. So these tests were set up perfect. And they show people went in with the same demographics asking for the same type of housing, and there are heat maps of where they were shown housing.
So some people were never going to be shown this, and
they were shown housing based on what they looked like in neighborhoods with people that had more people that looked like them, despite them not asking for that and never discussing that, and only coming in based on economics and what their needs for housing.
Where does that come from? I heard you say systems, but does that come from the behavior of that agent, or does it come from and the individual mindset of the agent, thinking they're being of service? And I'm trying to just I'm not giving them off the hook here, but I'm more curious, you know?
It comes from both. I mean, it comes from the individual. The individual is responsible. And the agents are supposed to get a lot of education.
Yeah.
So, but it also comes from, and as I've said, because people made a big deal, real estate agents in Long Island are terrible. No, if you tested real estate agents in North Dakota, you'd see the same thing. If you tested bankers on Long Island, you'd see the same percentages. The problem is, and a lot of it goes back to the systems we have that keep in place that type of lies about people, the education systems we have that don't educate people well enough about our history so that they understand when they're discriminating and where these patterns come from. So yes, the individual is responsible, but the individual is also swimming in, this ocean. There's this famous graduation speech by the author, I can't remember, it's called "What is Water?" where these little tiny fish don't realize that they're in water.
Right.
We don't realize that we're in this discriminatory system, and people often reflect that out.
Sure. Right.
Without awareness. There's also a great book called Biased by Jennifer, I can't remember her name, that talks about how this bias imbues people, and especially when you segregate people, it makes it worse, because if you don't,
well, it just continues to perpetuate itself, right?
Well, not only that, it's easier to accept people as the other, as John A. Powell talks about it, if you're not dealing with them on a human basis.
Right.
When you deal with people on a human basis and see that they're exactly the same, then it kind of rips down those myths about
Well, it's not
people.
the individual versus the group, because if I don't interact with this group, I can just say, well, that's how that group is, right? Versus if I...
And our mind does like shortcuts. That's the whole thing about behavioral psychology. Our mind likes shortcuts, and it's hard work for us to overcome those shortcuts.
It's work, though.
But it's work that
it needs to be done.
That all our religious traditions teach us we should do. All of them teach us that we should do that work.
It should be done. Just because it's work, it means we lean in and we do it. How do you see, because it's not fixing systems, because the systems are doing what they're doing. It's replacing systems. So how do you, I have some ideas to run across you, but how do you say ways that we replace existing systems?
Well, sometimes it's putting systems in place. For instance, there's no education requirement for landlords. So I've been pushing for various systems to give them education. Now, they're responsible for knowing the laws of their business, and everybody else in the real estate world has some type of education requirement. Real estate agents, brokers, mortgage brokers, attorneys. On the other hand, there's systems that don't work, like zoning. That need to be completely replaced. And there are other states that have done that. Here they fought, in fact, Long Island, they fought most against it anywhere in the state. But our zoning is going to keep doing what it's doing, and it's going to keep segregating people, and it's going to keep building us from the house. So that system needs to be replaced, or what they've done in some other states is they've created an easy appeal system above to take you out of that, so that somebody can make a rational decision about whether an affordable housing development should go here.
So that they're layering on something to improve.
Either you can layer on, you could replace it. There's a city in Texas that has no zoning. No zoning at all.
Meaning I could build commercial and residential?
And the system and the market basically push you towards what you can do. So, I mean, there are different ways, but you have to do it. You can't just say, if a system's having wrong outcomes, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to make it do the right outcome.
Right,
because the system's going to push against you.
Because it's working the right way. right?
Yes.
It's not the moral way, it's not the appropriate way, but it's doing what it was set in motion.
So
to
you
do.
have to look at the system. Is it that there's a lack of system, like landlords, where there's no education, or do you have a very structured system like zoning, where it's continually making the wrong outcomes, and
Right.
it either needs a control above it, or it needs to be completely replaced, or both.
Yeah. What type of law did you practice?
I was a local real estate attorney.
You were.
I help people buy and sell.
So you were in this work,
There's
yeah.
nothing funner in the world than helping a first-time home
Of
buyer.
course not. You
Oh my God.
That's the American dream, right?
I loved helping first-time home buyers.
Yeah.
Hated doing evictions. I did evictions.
Yeah,
Hated doing them.
that's a bummer.
Yeah.
I mean, like one is like great and the other one sucks.
Nobody's happy.
No,
Nobody's
no,
happy.
nobody's
The landlord
winning.
isn't
No
happy
one's
either.
winning. Man.
Nobody's
no.
happy.
No, no one wins. I remember really, we're almost out of time, which is unbelievable. But I want to
We had a
ask
great
you,
time.
We did. We'll have another. We'll do it again. Here's my quick one. I was at an event not too long ago with the HIA. That's probably not the recent one. Last year I was at, and one of the builders was speaking. And as I understand it, you mentioned this whole thing about single-family homes. We didn't get to dive in deep enough. But we don't need more 60 by 100 single-family homes, right? Like that's not even what the buyer wants. Forget about protected class, not protected class. As I understand it, that's not who the buyer is anymore. They want something where maybe it's a building that's 20 or 30 stories with a gym in the basement and a social area and stuff like that, right?
Or even a duplex or a triplex or an accessory dwelling unit.
What is that?
Well, the thing is, they've existed all the time. I grew up in Copiague. In Amityville, they'd have these little houses out back. People in the old days would call them granny shacks.
Okay, yeah.
Because often that's where the grandparents would live.
Sure.
And, it's a small house on the property. Because the properties are so big, we can accommodate another family.
But who is it? Is it another family or is it a family, extended family?
Sometimes it's your extended family, sometimes it's another family. Sometimes there's a homeowner that's lived there a long time and they want to downsize into the accessory unit and rent out the big house because they don't need the 4 bedrooms anymore.
Right.
The kids have flown the coop.
So what's the piece there that we need to allow accessory dwelling units? Got it.
That we need to allow it, that we need laws. And the other thing is we need not to have every single municipality have a different set of laws.
Yeah, it's killer. You can't even. I've heard you can't even build here. And I have a friend of mine who's been on this program, handsome home buyer, Charles Meinraub. Don't know if you ever met him, but he came up with his own, created his own company called Captain Permit because permits were a major problem with all these different jurisdictions and stuff.
And it adds so much to the cost.
100%, not necessary, but that's bureaucracy. That's a whole nother conversation. How does people? We're running out. So how do people get in touch with you to learn more?
Easiest way to find us is lifairhousing.org is our website, lifairhousing.org. You can email me, my first name, Ian, I-A-N, at lifairhousing.org. Phone number 631-567-5111, 631-567-5111. If you go to the website, there's a contact button on there. And if you need to get a hold of me, if it has to do with housing, if we don't do it, I'll try and get you somebody who does.
I know a little bit about connecting, but I think you just were trying to be a connector there at the end. If you don't have it, you're going to connect somebody. I love that. Ian, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate it. We're going to have some more fun after this, too. This is Tommy D. The show is Long Island Changemakers. I'm learning every single episode we do. I learn from my guests. I'm more knowledgeable, and I like to play nonprofit sector connector. Make it a great day, everybody. This has been another In Focus production. I'll see you later. Bye.